Now we'll look at the supply curve and the factors that will shift the supply curve. So, like when we were looking at the demand curve, we are talking about an entire shift of the curve with these factors. When there is a price change of this good, the one that we're looking at right here, let's say this was peanut butter, then this would be the supply of peanut butter. And so what's telling you is that at $5, apparently the manufacturers are going to supply 5. At $7, they're willing to supply 7. And that's based on various other factors that impact their ability to supply being at a certain level. It depends on their technology, which in econ speak, technology doesn't mean computers and IT by itself. Technology is a broader definition. Technology is defined as the process of turning inputs into outputs. So if anything helps them turn inputs into outputs, that's a technological improvement. So this supply curve here is drawn based on a particular level of technology, and if that technology changes, then instead of supplying 5 units at $5, they might supply 7. Instead of supplying 3 units at $3, they might supply 5. And so you get this whole shift to the right, this whole increase in the supply curve. So it's worth taking a moment here to think about the direction our supply curve is changing. Is it increasing or decreasing? For some reason, moving this direction sometimes is thought of as increasing because you see it's sort of moving up, right? And up is an increase. Unfortunately, that is a bit deceiving when it comes to the supply curve. What you have to do is look at what does it mean if you do have a curve actually shift to the left like this. What you're saying is that $5 used to be willing, the suppliers used to be willing to supply 5, and now that it has shifted up or to the left, which is how I prefer to say it, they're only willing to supply 3. So that is a decrease in supply. Every price is now associated with the lower quantity supplied when it shifts this leftward direction. So that would be the decrease in supply. So shifting rightward is the increase in supply. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what these factors are, each one of them. There'll be 5 of them total. The first factor we'll talk about is substitutes in production prices. What does that mean? Well, this is for firms that produce more than one product. This is for firms that are deciding how much of their total output they want to produce in these, how they're going to divide it out against these products. And so when the price of one of these alternative products goes up, I'm going to shift my production in that way. You can think about that other market, again, the one we're not looking at. You can think about what's going on over there as probably movement along the supply curve. But whatever's going on, something has happened to cause the price to go up. And a higher price, if it is movement along the supply curve, is going to result in a higher quantity supplied of that product. Okay, so that's all going over there, and that's not what we're looking at. What we're wondering is what's going to happen here in this market, the other product I make. If I'm going to be shifting my production towards the other one, the one that has a higher price, then this product here is going to see its supply go down, okay? So if it was agriculture, it was a farmer that could plant corn or soybeans or various other types of things, when he makes this decision of what to plant, he's going to allocate more in the direction of the product that has the high price. And for the market we're looking at, if its substitute in production, if the substitute in production's price has gone up, then they're going to do less of this one. If your alternative that you could produce has a price go down, then you will increase the price, increase the supply of this product. The second factor we're going to look at that impacts the supply curve is the prices of inputs. This is probably the one you would think of on your own if you were having to come up with these. And the idea is it's simply one of the things I have to buy in order to make, assemble, create my final product. So if these things I have to buy to make my product get more expensive, then my overall cost is more expensive, then I cannot afford to continue to supply, let's say, at the price of $4, I can no longer afford to supply 4. I might only be able to supply 2. at the price of $6, I could no longer afford to actually put together 6. I might only be able to do 4. And so you get this shift to the left, a decrease in the supply curve because your prices of the inputs, the things you use to make the good, have gotten more expensive. So if you have a decrease in the price of inputs, you're going to see an increase in the supply curve. It is cheaper for you to make your final good. You are able, willing and able, to supply more at every price when the input prices go down. The third factor should look familiar if you've already studied the factors that shift demand. It is the same thing. It's just now we have to realize it is regarding suppliers' viewpoint. When we talked about the demand curve, we talked about the consumers developing an expectation of the price of that good sometime in the future. Now we want to talk about the suppliers having an expectation of the supply in the future. So you can imagine then that there is some future market, the same market in the future, say 3-4 months in the future, and the suppliers decide that something's going to happen to the price. So let's think about what this could be. Let's say it has to be something that you can store, that you don't have to sell right now and it'll spoil. So let's say it's going to be, I'll stick with cotton. So I can decide I have to harvest my cotton, I'm sure, when I have to harvest my cotton. But I can decide to sell it on the open market now, or I could probably put it in my own storage for a little while and sell it later. And my decision is going to depend on what I think is going to happen to the price in the future. So let's say that for whatever reason, the suppliers have an expectation of higher prices in the future. So they do their harvesting. Do they want to sell their harvest right now, which is the market we're looking at over here, is the supply of cotton now, or do they want to wait and do it in the future? Well, if they think the prices are going to be higher in the future, they want to wait and do it in the future. So that means that the market today, which is the one I'm being asked about, is actually going to see a decrease in supply at every price level. So you're going to see this leftward shift of the supply curve. If instead we had an expectation that the price of cotton was going to fall in the future, then of course we would want to supply right now the stuff we have, and you would see this increase in the supply. And so that's how expected future prices work. So if you're given a question that you can tell is expected future prices, the next thing you need to determine is, are they talking about buyers, consumers having an expectation? If that's the case, you're going to see the demand curve shifting. If the problem is presented in a way that tells you the sellers, the producers, those are the ones with an expectation, that tells you the supply curve will be affected. The fourth factor we're going to look at for affecting the supply curve is the number of firms. So if we're looking at a market supply curve, and maybe we can imagine these numbers down here representing thousands, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Then what we could say is that right now at $5, the firms in the market are willing to supply 5,000. And so this supply curve was drawn at a time when there were, say, 100 firms. But if there's been an increase in the number of firms in this market, let's say another 10 firms join the market, are created and establish themselves, it's reasonable to expect then that you could supply more at $5 than the original 100, that there would be some total increase at every price because you have these additional firms. So as the number of firms grows, as you increase the number of firms, you'll see the total quantity being supplied increasing at every price. So a rightward shift of supply or an increase in supply. As the number of firms goes down, then obviously it's the opposite. You're going to have fewer units supplied at every price. And that takes us to our last factor that we need to be aware of impacting the supply curve. I mentioned in the very beginning, it is technology. Remember, technology is a very broad term. It's the process of turning inputs into outputs. It would even include in a retail store, something you may not think there's a lot of technology involved, but the way they choose to lay out their products is actually their process of turning inputs, which is the goods they have on their shelves, into outputs, which is basically selling it to you. And so technology is a very broad term. So technology is also something that tends to be a positive. We don't generally have a forgetting of how to do something where we suddenly can't turn our inputs and outputs as well as we used to. So in general, we're going to see technology associated with an increase in supply. That because of the way we used to do business, we could only afford to supply 4 units at $4. But because we have some process that increases our ability to produce, we're actually now able to maybe supply 7. And at $7, we used to be able to supply 7, but now we could actually supply 10. So technology is going to be, in general, a shift to the right because it's showing us some increase in our ability to produce. All right, so that will conclude the 5 outside factors or third factors that have an impact on our supply curve. So just one more reminder, can't say it too many times, if the price of the good itself that we're looking at on this graph is what's changing, we go from $4 to $5, $5 to $6, all that means is that we're saying, okay, at $4 we used to supply 4, now the price is 5, we'll supply 5, and so we get this movement up along the supply curve when the price goes up. And obviously when the price goes down, we're going to have this movement down along the supply curve. But when the supply curve is drawn, it is drawn assuming that all these outside third factors over here are at a certain level. And so when one of those changes, that's what we've been talking about in this video, it actually changes the entire mapping of what quantity will be supplied at every price. Now, if you look over here like we did last time, you can actually see maybe a little pattern there in the first letters. So we can see here S-P-E-N-T, spent. So you can use that as your mnemonic device for memorizing the factors that shift the supply curve. But I'm going to give you a little heads up here. You're going to have to be careful that you don't just remember spent for supply and septic for demand. You're also going to have to think a little bit about what the things are. Because with those particular mnemonic devices, you're going to see a lot of overlap in letters, S, E, P, T. It's in both of them, right? So you can't just say, okay, S is for supply, and then you have to remember, what did it stand for? For supply, it was substitutes and production prices, that the other thing I could produce has a price change. What does that do for my supply of this good? But S in the demand side was the price of a substitute product that I could consume has changed. What does that do to my demand curve? So you're going to have to put a little extra effort in on that. T is one I see a lot of people struggle with. They'll remember that, oh, it was that T one. And then they'll, understand it was supply that was changing. They'll get everything right. And then they'll say taste and preferences because they remember that stood for T. But you have to think about what these mean. Taste and preferences is a consumer idea. It's how people feel about a product they're going to consume, whereas T, technology, is completely a supply and production type of concept. So put a little extra effort into not just memorizing spent and septic, but understanding what these things mean so that you understand, okay, this is a consumer issue or this is a producer issue. Other than that, I recommend practicing, working problems that are asking you to determine which factor is at play and in which way it would shift the curve. And also, again, don't overthink. Make sure that you're, when you're reasoning through a problem, that if there is another market in play, it might help to actually sketch that market out and then focus on what is actually happening in the market you're being asked about, because that's also a very common mistake. All right, I think you've got what you need to understand the factors that shift supply and demand.